So we're so happy to have back with us Jill Wheeler and Cassie Russell. And then our other presenter today, one of our own, Suzanne Bartholomew, and she's an extension specialist with Iowa State. And we'll be hearing from her a little bit later. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Jill and Cassie.
Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you all for joining again. We hope you've been with us for our prior 2 sessions. If you missed them, don't worry, you'll get a recording in a little bit, but we're excited today to talk about debt. And before we go further, we do need to remind you about this disclaimer, which you may have heard before, but everything Jill and I share is our own opinion and might not represent the Bureau's views. Nothing we talk about today is legal interpretation, guidance, or advice from the Bureau. And if we share third-party resources or links, it's not an endorsement. And just to know that there are many services in the marketplace that might meet your needs or the needs of the people that you work with. I know Laura said it, but it looks like we had a few people join. So today's session is being recorded. All right, so I'm going to drop in the chat that materials links and our crosswalk again. And the wonderful team hosting us is also working on putting together a box link to share with you all with these resources. So if you don't have Adobe and can't download those materials, don't worry, you'll be able to get them later. So we are going to look at materials from the Your Money, Your Goals Financial Empowerment Toolkit, some of the companion guides, and some of the booklets. But we are going to get started by jumping in with debt, and then we're going to do a little activity. So what is debt? Debt is money you owe. It's a liability on your balance sheet. And one thing that can be important to think about is that debt might obligate future income. So if I have a car note or a student loan, $200, $300, $400 is going to need to go to that payment. And one thing that we like to highlight is that debt is different than credit. So credit is the ability to borrow money, and I can have access to credit without having any debt. Debt is the result of using credit. So I'm going to switch screens. And we want you to think about what debt you see most in your work. And we're going to use a tool called Mentimeter. And I'm just going to put a link so you can access it by opening a new window, or you can use it on a smartphone if you have access to one. And I'm putting that code in there, and it's just menti.com. It's a real short link for you. And I'm going to switch to sharing this screen. You all should see it. So these are the instructions. So you can click on the link in the chat, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code 32897616. And if you have a phone and you want to access it that way, you can use the QR code. So you open your pictures and you scan that code and a link will pop up. And I see 11 hearts in the bottom, 12, great. So I'd like to see about half of us get onto the Menti. So if you can heart when you get there, that's how we'll know we can move on. And we'll share these results out with you too. So we're gonna have some questions about general Your Money, Your Goals usage later on. So this is an opportunity to share some ideas with your colleagues as well. Okay. So our first one is just to make sure we're all comfortable with the technology, and we want to know what is the best ice cream flavor: vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, or other. So go ahead and vote for your favorite. Right, great. And if you put other, tell us in the chat what you think is best. All right, so as you can see, it's easy to interact with this. program. We're going to use it throughout today. So when we're done with our next question, you can go ahead and click out of it. If you accidentally exit out of your window or your cell phone window, that's just fine. You can just go back and add that in. Ooh, okay. Vanilla caramel, cookies and cream, toasted coconut. All of those sound delicious. And chocolate chip. Okay. Ooh, espresso crunch. All right. Well, thank you all for just doing that quick activity to get us oriented to Menti. Now we want to know, what type of debt do you see or hear about most in your work? So what type of debt comes up most in your work? Student loans, car notes, equipment loans. And you can add up to 3 and you can participate more than once. So tell us what you see the most. Great. Credit card, student loan, mortgage, credit card, medical looks pretty big. So today we're going to cover some of the basics of debt. And then next week on our 5th day, we'll talk about consumer protection related to student loans, medical debt, and really dive into some more of the specifics. But it looks like student loans, car loans, medical debt are definitely a common thread here. Great. Well, thank you all for participating. I'm going to switch back over to our slides. And we want to just start by thinking a little differently about debt. So as we talked about, we all come in with money values, and we might have different ideas about quote unquote good debt and bad debt. And so what we want to do is think about if it's really that simple. So for a student loan, tell me in the chat, what's good about a student loan? What's good about a student loan? Yeah, absolutely. Being able to attend school. Somebody says nothing, you're jumping ahead. I really challenge you to think about something positive. So at one point, lowest interest rates were lower, investment to get our paying job, advances human capital. Janet, tell me more about sets of payments for long term. Higher earning potential, can be consumer friendly repayment terms, right? There's both federal and private student loans. Moving forward, yeah, credit building. Yeah, if you're able to make those payments on time, it can certainly help somebody build their credit. Depending on the type of loan you get, you might not have to pay it back immediately. Opportunities that come with furthering education. Absolutely. You all tackle them all. Okay, so what are some bad or potential challenges with student loans? What are some challenges or bad things about student loans? Borrowing more than necessary. Yeah. Most students don't know what they owe, being able to pay them back. Lack of oversight, can afford to pay them back. Too much debt for the chosen career. High interest for a long period of time. It seems like free money, but it's not understood. Yeah. So somebody is suggesting areas for improvement, but just really highlighting, the way interest capitalizes, although recently some changes were announced to that, at least for undergrad loans. Emotional stress. Yeah. Also, you may have worked with people who were unable to continue school. So maybe they have debt from their education, but not the career advancement that we talked about as a pro. It's also challenging to get forgiven during bankruptcy. Yeah, and somebody noted, for some folks, you really can't avoid this debt, and that's absolutely true. Okay, so that's just to show that there are some pros and cons, for every type of debt. And so now we want to think about with a payday loan. What's bad about a payday loan? We're going to start with the negative side this time. So what's a con? Sharks. Okay. It's my favorite animal, but I know what you mean. What's bad about a payday loan? Really high interest rate. Yeah, loan sharks, the rate of interest. What else? Difficult to pay off and not roll over, right? So you kind of get into this cycle. Somebody said a debt trap, that it targets folks with low incomes. Absolutely. It's easy to get behind. Okay, right. So I think we're all in agreement there that, oh, interesting. Yeah. So somebody said they're not legal in their state. You're using future income to support current lifestyle, right? So that obligation part that we talked about. Okay, so I think this is going to be challenging for some of you, but what could be potentially good about a payday loan? Yeah, fast cash. It meets a current need. Easy and fast. Yeah. Right, there might be no other options, right? So payday lenders are often open late and on the weekends when financial institutions aren't. We also hear from people that maybe the level of customer service that they receive at a payday lender is more friendly than at a more mainstream financial institution. And it can meet an immediate need, right? So I spent a lot of time working in domestic violence shelters, and people would have payday loans because they were accessing a payday loan to stay in a hotel for a night. To get to safety. So sometimes when people really feel like they have no choices, that might be the place that they turn to. So we're not advocating for any one particular kind of debt, but just to realize that there are pros and cons, and this is the type of evaluation that folks might want to undertake before they take a certain type of debt on. So now we want to look at our debt log, and one second here, I'm going to add a link into the chat. Sorry, now you can't see the slides for a minute. And we are also in a moment going to look at the reentry debt log, and I'm going to add the debt log in Spanish in the chat as well. And so I'm just going to add all these links so that you have them as we go in this section. Okay, so here we're looking at the version of the tool in the toolkit. So we see that image in the top right, and it starts with common types of debt that can help you brainstorm. And this can be really helpful because maybe somebody doesn't think of a balance on a credit card as credit card debt, or maybe they're forgetting about money that they owe to family or friends, past due fines and fees, payday loans, student loans, medical debt. And so this really helps somebody start with a log to help them start the process of prioritizing their debt payments. And this can be overwhelming, right? Many people might not know the total amount left they have to pay, their interest rate, or have a goal for paying it off. But we encourage people, just to get started by making a list, just as we did with income and expenses. You really have to start with that knowledge piece. So we see here what it might look like. So somebody added a student loan and a car loan, and just normalizing that people might need to print out additional sheets or pages of the tool to have enough room for everything. And then they might need access to online banking records or other records. I don't know the interest rate for my credit card off the top of my head, right? So they might need to access some information to really be able to fill this out. We also have the reentry debt log, and you'll see in the top right that this is in the Focus on Reentry Companion Guide. And this is a little bit different because it encourages people to think about consequences. We're going to look at repayment strategies in just a second, but we wanted to introduce this tool just to highlight that for some people, looking at prioritizing by interest rate isn't going to work, or the snowball method, which we'll talk about in a moment, because they're facing other consequences like reincarceration, like eviction. Those might bump a debt up in priority order. And so we like to highlight that this tool really encompasses different priorities for those that have experienced incarceration. So those are the two tools to help you get started with debt. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill and Suzanne to talk to us a little bit more about the tools before we dive into debt action plans.
Great. Thanks so much, Cassie. And thanks again to our hosts from Arkansas, Dr. Laura Hendricks and team. We want to jump into the next section with some examples from Suzanne Bartholome, who has used these tools and collaborated closely with the Bureau team for many years. Suzanne is an associate professor and extension state specialist at Iowa State University. We're really appreciative of her time and willingness to be here today. And Suzanne, could you tell us a little about your role, your experience, and how you've used some of the tools and materials from the Focus on Reentry resources?
Thank
Any
you.
other experience that you have a wealth of knowledge to share with us.
Good morning. Yeah, so I'm Suzanne Bartholome, and I'm the Extension State Specialist at Iowa State. And so that just, you probably know that means that I work with a team of educators who provide education throughout the state of Iowa, and several of them are on the call or on Zoom today, which is great, and have delivered Your Money, Your Goals either one-on-one or in a group setting. So we've used Your Money, Your Goals, like you said, for several years, since 2015, since the initial cohort. And we use it in two ways. We train professionals about the toolkit, and that has evolved over time. We started with just a straight out 8-hour trying to cover the entire toolkit, which is pretty daunting. It's a lot of information. So then we reiterated that to a 12-hour hybrid training where there was kind of downtime between. It was like 4 hours in person, 2 hours online, 4 hours in person. And so we switched over from that to, we're currently at 4 hours where we're training on the toolkit. And we cover modules 1 through 6. And so for the debt, and I really am focusing today on the debt, not so much on the Focus on Reentry, although we have used Your Money, Your Goals, I think, in the corrections, but really not focused on reentry so much. But so for the debt module, we spend about 35 minutes. And as Pam said yesterday, she splits hers into 2 sessions because it's so much material. But the activities that we use from the debt session is, going through good versus bad debt, the cost of unexpected car repair, which is always a useful one, and then calculating debt to income had we just finished up a great series this summer with the Department of Health and Human Services, and I think I have my team on the line. They had 3 trainings of about 100 FADS workers, which are the family family development and self-sufficiency program. So basically they're working with families who are on TAMP, and they're working at community actions agencies. We did do a needs assessment with them, and we're planning on doing booster sessions with them. So we're going to be doing quarterly sessions with these workers. And I did identify debt as one thing they wanted to help in terms of helping their clients avoid collections, avoid eviction, and then just really help prioritizing their bills. Not too many of them had Your Money, Your Goals before, which is really good. So the other way we use Your Money, Your Goals, and specifically debt, is that during COVID-19, we created kind of a signature, I call it a signature program to deliver to Iowans, where we really integrated the toolkits, and we had one on prioritizing bills, one on credit, and then one on debt. And so for the debt one, it's an hour program. We take the booklets, we have icons in the PowerPoints, and it's called Money Smart Managing Debt When Money is Short. So it's really we figured that during COVID-19 that individuals will be having problems managing their credit, their debt, and prioritizing bills because of income issues. So we start the session by trying to relate how debt affects financial well-being, getting back to that CFPB definition, which is so important, to see how that affects that. Then we have My Debt Picture. We start with that and how they feel about their debt. We help them understand the different types of debt, how they get their information on debt. And we use that My Monthly Debt Picture tool that you have. And so we go through an example using that tool. We also, from the booklet, there's that focus on prioritizing debt and what the risks are for with the little squirrel, taking it a step further. So that's in our session. We really focus on the consequences of debt and not, when you don't pay your debt, what are what's going to happen? Is there repossession? Are you going to lose your job? And so weighing the consequences. We have an action steps, kind of like a half sheet that is a checklist that we have the participants leave with so that they would commit to an action. And so we have the debt log on there, figuring out your debt to income ratio, because we also do use your tool about the guidelines to debt to income ratios. So that's really kind of been a program, because our whole system had this initiative around financial security for Iowans as a response to COVID-19. We were able to use the booklets and integrate them into, like I said, 3 sessions. We have a variety of, and I know people on the call are interested in partnerships. And so we, like I said, just have a great one right now with the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, with their FADS workers. Kalen's on the call. He works with the YMCA supportive housing. Phyllis is on the call, and she does a mandatory financial literacy training twice a year with a group in her neck of the woods. So, and if they want to put in the chat, maybe some of their partnerships people might be interested in, I don't know. But I'm sorry, I don't have specifically focused on reentry. And if someone, in the group has worked with corrections and maybe they can put it in the chat. But that's kind of the extent of the work we've been doing in Iowa.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And I'm curious, I'm so glad you touched on that issue of partnerships, because that can be so important in really reaching people and deepening the impact. And I'm curious if you have any tips for, starting new partnerships, or how, on the evolution of any of those partnerships, because we know that's both a challenge to build those strong partnerships and align on priorities and outcomes. So curious if you have any additional tips to share now or later in the series.
Thank you. Yeah, we all live and die by partnerships, in terms of audiences. And Kalen's on the call, and we got kind of lucky on the Department of Health and Human Services, I have to say. They had some money to spend at the end of of their fiscal year, and said, let's spend it on getting some training for their staff workers. So that worked out really well. But most of the specialists that are on the call, they have established, they're part of coalitions and go to, monthly meetings often, and try and advocate for the financial literacy needs, and really just, that's part of their job. And I'm sure they can tell you that everyone on the call, the networking and going to coalition meetings, working with librarians, but it's hard to build a partnership. It's a big commitment, big time commitment. But when you get a good one, it pays off.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Suzanne, for taking time today and being with us throughout the series. I do want to encourage others to share their ideas and experiences in the chat, because it sounds like many of you on this call have a lot to contribute. And as we continue, I'll turn it back over to Cassie for a couple more tools before we jump into some short breakout rooms.
Thanks so much, Jill, and thanks, Suzanne. And just to echo Jill's request, if you have partnerships, we'd love to hear about them in the chat, whether you partner with a local library, or if you don't have a partnership and you're interested in one, tell us why. But now we're going to turn to a tool in the or the Debt Getting in Your Way booklet, which is the one with the octopus. And if you have a paper copy, it's the tool with the elephant. And we see here that our coaching question is, what are your goals? And so we really want somebody to think about their debt action plan in alignment with some of those goals that we talked about on day 1. So this has somebody start by thinking, what goal is your debt keeping you from reaching? So I saw in the chat that sometimes student loan debt might prevent somebody from qualifying for a mortgage. And so that might be something somebody is working on, where they want to live, how they want to build their family, jobs they might be interested in. Those are things that often come up here. And then we have somebody talk about something they want to achieve. So listing the action steps. So they're going to ask to change their due date. They're going to allocate $20 more to their credit card. resources that they might use in that process, and then to have them set a date to complete. So that just helps somebody really start to think. And I'd encourage you to, recognize that some of the steps might be getting into an online account to find the information to fill out the debt log. Some of them might be smaller information gathering steps that somebody really needs in order to take action on their debt. And then we go to the squirrel tool, which Suzanne mentioned. And so this helps somebody prioritize their debt. So our question here is, how do you decide which debts to pay first? And we want somebody to bring any overdue notices, letters that threaten eviction, repossession, default, or a discontinuation of service. So usually like a shut-off notice for a utility. And on the inside, we want somebody to think about the risks of making a late debt payment. And this is in addition to financial risks, right? So ask them to think about what are some things that they need to get a job, or keep a job, right? They need their car to get to and from work. They need to pay insurance. Maybe they have a court-ordered obligation like past due court fines and fees. What do they need to stay housed? So how do they handle it if they have back rent or late mortgage or a past due utility bill? And then other debts. So credit card debt, debts in collection, loans to family and friends, medical debt, past due bills, payday loans, student loans. And then there's a list for other, so that if somebody has a different type of debt, they can add it. And then we want them to prioritize. So if someone's not able to pay all of their debts and they have to delay some payments, ranking them in terms of priority from the highest, the debt they'll pay the first to the lowest. So Samantha's going to help us get into breakout rooms, and we want you to talk for about 5 minutes. And in the scenario, the person's going to have back rent, credit card, student loans, and medical debt. All right, welcome back, everybody. So tell us in the chat, what order would you pay those debts in? So we had back rent, credit card, student loans, and medical debt. Okay, great. So one group said back rent, student loans, credit, and medical. Somebody else said ditto. And I'm wondering if you can tell us why in the chat. Why was that your ordering? So it seems like everyone was in agreement. Okay, somebody said credit card before student loans. Shelter's a priority, yeah. And sometimes it might look different for different people. Somebody might prioritize a car payment. And I've had this happen working in services for folks who are houseless, where somebody prioritizes a car payment because I can sleep in my car, but I can't come up with that, $900 to make rent. Interest rate is probably higher on the credit card versus the student loan. Yeah. And the student loan was a little bit of a trick question. We didn't really give you enough information about whether it's federal or private and the agreement. Medical last because it might not have interest. You might be able to work on payments. There's also now changes to how medical debt shows up on your credit report. And so that might be protective. Somebody said they would pay the credit card before the student loans because then you might have a little room to get the parts if your car broke down. So thinking ahead about other potential emergencies. Great. So as you can see, you all came up with similar but different answers. And that's the whole point of this tool. People might have different priorities or ways of thinking about things, and this just really helps them. So, Jill, I'm wondering if you can paste the information about the blog on No Surprises in the chat. I think that'll answer your question about access to medical services. And if you can't find it, Jill, I can paste it in a moment, but I'm going to start sharing my screen.
Plug that in.
Thank you. Okay, so we briefly wanted to mention another tool in the toolkit called Comparing Auto Loans. And when shopping for an auto loan, this helps you evaluate the total cost and also provides information about what you can negotiate for and what you can't. So this helps somebody compare their upfront costs. So here in the example, we see somebody's buying a $20,000 car. They have about $300 in add-ons, and then their tax, title, registration is $1,400, and then they have $100 in negotiable fees. So the total cost of the car before interest actually comes up to $21,800. And then the next section of the tool has somebody add information about their loan, how much they're going to put down, and can really help somebody compare. So there's 2 columns so that they can compare different options for the same car. So we just wanted to highlight that this tool can help somebody if they're being proactive before taking on an auto loan. We know that's not everyone's situation, but it can be helpful for people who are considering purchasing a car. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill now, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about what to do when a debt collector calls and some newer consumer protections. So Jill, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Cassie. And just to highlight, I did paste a couple links in the chat that include blogs and recent postings related to a variety of protections around medical debt, and in particular, the No Surprises Act. So now we'll just touch briefly on a few additional tools. One important tool is when debt collectors call. So this is available in the toolkit and can easily be downloaded. And I'll ask Cassie to put the links there in the chat. So one important, really important piece of information to remember: if a person is feeling overwhelmed with calls or contacts from debt collectors, that one important step is to make sure that the debt is legitimate and that the amounts are correct, that they know what they owe. And so, there are cases when people are contacted and the debt is not actually theirs, or they may no longer be liable for that debt. So the when debt collectors call tool helps people prepare by having a list of questions on hand. So when they're contacted, they can go through a simple checklist and ask some of those questions to get the basics that they need to really determine how to take action. So they should make sure to ask the name and contact information for the debt collector, understand what is the original creditor's name and address, the account number, and details like the amount owed. So once they get this information down, they can then take it to someone who can help them work through it and decide what steps to follow up on then. And if they find that they don't owe the debt, they can take the appropriate actions. So again, here's an example of the completed tool of what to say to a debt collector. So here a person is taking down the details, and then we have a number of referral resources to help people contact a lawyer or accessible legal services to get advice related to their debt obligations. So I will ask Cassie to also paste some of those links in the chat. And before we go on, I do want to highlight that a couple of these most popular tools are available in Spanish. So we'll include those Spanish links in the chat as well. And now, I would love to hear in the chat, have any of you all had recent experiences, someone you work with or someone you know being contacted by debt collectors? Is that a common concern that you're hearing these days? Or do you want to share any experiences around dealing with that topic or using these tools with a person that you've been training or serving? So encourage people to share experiences in the chat. And then I do want to continue on to highlight a couple updates. So under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, there are a few important protections for all consumers. So the act lays out guidelines that protect people from repeated phone calls or calls that really intend to annoy, threaten, or harass a person. They are prevented from using obscene or profane language, any threats of violence or harm, publishing lists of people who who refuse to pay their debts. And debt collectors cannot call someone without telling you who they are, or use false or manipulated or misleading practices in contacting a person to collect debts. And could we continue to the next slide, Cassie? So this rule, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, was just recently updated in November. So in November of 2021, the CFPB passed an updated rule that took effect, and that helped provide some additional clarity on how debt collectors can communicate with a person. As we all know, the communications environment is changing rapidly, so there are many more ways to reach out to a person, including social media or a variety of communications tools. So that helped clarify what information debt collectors are required to provide at the outset of a collection, and enumerated some additional rights around the collection process. So I'll just briefly cover a few updates on key things to know about the new debt collection rule. So we'll lay out, I know we'll just run through these quickly, but it's important for people to understand what a debt collection validation notice is. It basically it specifies the information a debt collector needs to provide, and itemization of the amounts and dates. Next slide, please. The new debt rule also specifies how often a collector can contact a person. So they cannot be contacted by telephone more than 7 times within a 7-day period, or within 7 days after engaging in a phone conversation about a particular debt. Next slide. There are rules about how or when a debt collector can report to a credit reporting company. We know people are concerned about how these debts will affect their credit history and their credit score. So there are certain rules that lay out how a collector must communicate with a person, and then how they can convey that information to a credit reporting agency. And as we know, with social media, there's a potential for additional ways to contact people who owe or may owe a debt. So there are new rules related to contacting people through social media. Those messages must be kept private. The debt collector must identify themselves as a debt collector, and they must provide a way for you to opt out of those communications. A limited content message has been defined as a type of voicemail that a debt collector can leave. They're allowed to leave it, but they must include specific information. It must include a business name, but it should not indicate that that caller is a debt collector. There's should be a phone number so the person is able to return the call, and a request for a reply, and the name of the person you can contact with a reply. So again, this is to protect a person's privacy, depending on who has access to the voicemail message, and to provide clear steps for follow-up. Next slide, please, Cassie. And just a couple additional comments before we go on to a few additional tools. I really want to emphasize how important your role is in helping people understand their rights, be aware of what's happening in your community, and the really important position that you all are in, having access to understanding the rules and protection, and being in touch with people who may be sharing stories, sharing experiences that we may not necessarily be hearing about. So we talked earlier this week about the ways to file a complaint. And again, the complaint process is there to make sure that people receive an appropriate response from a company. So if you feel a company is violating rights, not responding correctly, the complaint system is one great source of reporting that information. And the Bureau watches what happens to follow trends, to look at potential enforcement actions, to understand what's happening in the field. There are a number of other ways to communicate with us. any, on the Bureau staff, any of us are happy to help convey information, even if you think this may not be something that's reportable, but this is something we're concerned about, that people are experiencing in our community. Something doesn't seem quite right, and we think it's worth, someone knowing about this. So we can help convey that to the right office within the Bureau to take a look at what's happening and determine if there is action that could be taken to follow up or make sure that the system is working smoothly. So just want to really emphasize, if you see predatory practices, discrimination, concerns about people's rights being violated, please reach out to the Bureau. There's the complaint function I mentioned. You can contact us directly. I'll share the team inbox and my email in the chat again. And then on the Bureau's webpage, there is also a tell your story function and a few additional contacts, and ombudsman office. I'll share a few additional links there in the chat, but really just want to emphasize the important role that you all play in helping to stay on the lookout and helping to resolve problems. So I will turn it back to Cassie. And I'm curious if anyone wants to share experiences related to debt collections or questions around how to, share information. We would be glad to respond to that directly or privately. So I'll turn it back to Cassie now.
Thanks so much, Jill. So now we're going to look at a tool in the debt booklet, and this is in the very back, and it's called the resource card tool. And we have different versions of this in different booklets, but this tool is designed to provide information about how to deal with medical bills, debt, get a response from banks and debt collectors, and find a lawyer if necessary. So we see here that the top part of the tool is always blank, and this is for you to fill in local resources. And then the bottom bullet points have information about federal resources. So as Jill mentioned, if something isn't working right in the marketplace, you can always submit a complaint with the CFPB, and there's the link there. There's also a link for how to find an attorney, how to pay for college, getting help with Medicaid, where to find more information about debt collection, and then also information for homeowners about preventing foreclosure. So this can be a great tool. We've seen it used in a variety of ways. One setting, they did groups and they had everybody share the resources that participants knew about in the community, and then they shared it out as a resource list. So I'm going to switch us back to our Menti. And thinking about those pages, we want to hear from you. And this goes back to the partnership conversation from earlier as well. So in that Menti, we want to know, what debt resources do you refer people to? And you don't have to share a specific name. It could be a consumer credit counseling agency. It could be a bankruptcy clinic, credit builder loans for folks that are interested in rebuilding their credit, etc. So what debt resources do you refer people to? Tell us in the Menti. And if you closed your Menti screen, that's fine. You can just go to menti.com and add the code 32897616. Great. Thank you. And I don't know what PowerPay is, so if you can tell us a little more about that. Haven't had to refer anyone, great. Legal aid, absolutely.
Cassie, while they're doing it, I'll just say real quick, PowerPay is from, was originally developed by Extension in Utah, and people can go on and they can register for a secure account. And like one of the debt tools you showed us, where you put in your amounts owed and what your interest rate is, and then you can play around with different kinds of repayment plans and see what would help you save the most in interest or pay off the debts your fastest, depending on how much extra you can put toward each debt each month. So it's kind of a fun little tool. And then they have some educational resources too. And it's non-biased, because research-based, because it is Extension.
Awesome. That sounds like a great tool. Thanks so much for sharing more about that. Okay, well, before Jill shares with us about some of the Bureau resources, we want to go to our next slide, and we're just curious about how you currently use your money or goals. So tell us if you use them individually or in groups, remotely, in person, a blend, if you add it into resources that you've developed, or if you use it as sort of a standalone tool. Great. So somebody's used some of the tools with probation, blended. Great. So just tell us in the chat. We'd love to, or in the chat or in the Menti, we'd love to, it's new to you. That's great. Our next question is going to be geared more towards you. And if you don't currently use it, that's totally fine. We're glad you're here. So training other professionals in small groups. Great. Court-ordered financial coaching sessions. Okay. And money money mentors. Sorry. So quite the alliteration. Okay. And now we want to know, out of the tools today, which tools are you most likely to use? So we talked about the debt log, the debt reentry debt log, debt action plan, prioritizing debt payments, comparing auto loans, and when debt collectors call. So go ahead and rank. You just drag, just like we would ask someone to prioritize their debts. And go ahead and tell us which one you are most likely to use, and go ahead and rank those. Right. So it looks like prioritizing debt payments. Anyone else tell us which tool you're most likely to use? Great. Well, thanks so much. It's always nice to sort of see the information visually. So it looks like prioritizing debt payments was pretty consistent, and then the debt log and the debt action plan. So thank you all. And I'm going to turn it back to Jill and switch back to our slides. And Jill is going to help us close out today's session.
Thanks, Cassie. I'll just briefly highlight a couple resources and I know people mention prioritizing bills, and so want to highlight a couple updated pages on protections. So some of the protections, don't change over time. So bill payment might remain the same, but during the pandemic, there were special protections related to certain housing related protections, access to free credit reports. So we try to keep really updated information on our main consumerfinance.gov webpage. So I plugged that in the chat. And again, just to highlight on the next slide, the Ask CFPB function is a great place to start looking for content on any question. It includes your money or goals and a number of other Bureau resources. So I know we are getting very close to wrapping up, and just would love to hear if there are any questions on print materials. Please feel free to put them in the chat. But would love to hear any, main takeaways from today and any requests for upcoming sessions. Next week, we'll talk more about credit, Spanish language materials on the 6th day, and would love to hear any requests in the chat as we wrap up today's session. And while we wait for any questions, I will just thank again Suzanne Bartholome for speaking and sharing your experience today. I really appreciate everyone being active in the chat and throughout this process, and would like to turn it back over to Dr. Laura Hendricks for any final words as we wrap up today's session.
Thanks, Cassie and Jill and Suzanne, for another great educational session today. And much appreciation to Samantha and Andrea for our Zoom support. And we're working on a resource folder for all of you that will have everything that they've shared. We'll be sending that out to you, sending you a link in an email when we've concluded our sessions next week. Thanks to everyone. We will see you next week Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, same time, same link. Thanks.